What's going on, everybody? Mortym here, continuing my short set of videos about the general pros and cons of each class. Starting with this one, we are obviously on the Sorcerer, and we're going to start that with Dark Magic. Now, just to clarify, I'm just going over the specific class skill lines, what that class is good at in general, what they're not particularly good at in general, things I don't care about them, stuff like that. So I'm going to go over each skill, show you guys the morphs for it, and then we're going to go over the passives, and then after that, I'm basically just going to talk about the pros and cons. So, starting with Dark Magic. Negate Magic. Basically, you put up a Globe of Magic Suppression, which dispels any placed effects immediately. Enemies within it are stunned for 12 seconds. Enemy players are silenced rather than stunned. Suppression Field damages enemies inside the globe. Absorption Field heals you and your allies if you are inside the globe. Crystal Shard, 1 second cast time, sorry about that. Hits them for a pretty significant amount of damage and then stuns them for 2.5 seconds. Crystal Blast damages enemies near the initial target, and Crystal Fragments adds a 35% chance of any other Magicka ability resetting the cooldown and making this instant and costless. You'll see pet builds use this a lot actually, but any Magicka build in general could use that. In case, it's very similar to Dark Talons from the Dragon Knight. You call Daedric Shards to immobilize enemies in front of you for 5.4 seconds. Shattering Prison deals damage when the effect ends, and then Restraining Prison snares enemies when the effect ends. Rune Prison, you basically imprison an enemy inside a sphere for 19.9 seconds. It is cancelled if the enemy takes damage. Now, Rune Cage changes it to where instead of being broken by all damage, it is just direct damage, and damage over time abilities will not break it. Defensive Rune, you actually cast this ability on yourself for 1.2 minutes, and then the first enemy to attack you gets the effect of the normal Rune Prison. Now, Dark Exchange, inherently by itself, it is a stamina ability that restores health and magicka. Dark Deal makes it a magicka ability that gives you health and stamina, and then Dark Conversion reduces the reduces the cost from almost 2,200 to 1644. That'll vary, of course, depending on what you've got your champion points in, but that's just so you can see the reduced cost. It's close to 25%. And then Daedric Mines, you will place 3 Daedric Mines around you, which is basically right at your feet. They arm after 3 seconds, deal damage, and immobilize enemies. Daedric Tomb allows you to place the mines at range, 25-meter range, instead of them being at your feet. Daedric Mine changes it from 3 mines to 5 mines at your feet. Now, the passives for this are Unholy Knowledge, which reduces magic and stamina costs. Blood Magic, which dark magic abilities that hit anything will restore 8% of your max health. Persistence, which dark magic abilities last 20% longer. And Exploitation, dark magic ability grants extra spell critical for 20 seconds. Moving on to Daedric Summoning, starting off with the ultimate, the Storm Atronach. By itself, you summon it in as a telegraph on the ground. It will stun everything in that radius as well as dealing 6k damage to all of them. It also gives a synergy, which will let other players use it and grant Major Berserk, increasing their damage by 25% for 8 seconds. So that's pretty good by itself. The Greater Storm Atronach morph will increase the duration, damage, and health of it. Summon Charged Atronach gives the Atronach an AoE ability. Now, Summon Unstable Familiar. So you summon a familiar, it does damage at range. That's pretty much it. Or it just deals damage. I don't remember if it's range or not, to be honest with you. And then the morphs are Summon a Clan Fear, which if you activate it again after it's summoned, it will heal you and the Clan Fear for 35% of your maximum health. And then Summon Volatile Familiar. If you use the ability again after it is summoned, it will pulse area damage and stun enemies. Now, Daedric Curse. You curse the enemy with a destructive rune, dealing damage to them, more so, and then about half that damage to all other nearby enemies after 6 seconds have passed. So, the morphs for that are Daedric Prey. Your pets will deal additional damage to a cursed target. 55% for your regular pets, and your Storm Atronach will deal 40% extra damage. Pet builds obviously use that quite a bit. Now, Haunting Curse basically changes it from basically going off once to it does it deals its damage twice, one at 3.5 seconds and again at 8.5 seconds. Now, Summoned Winged Twilight, by itself, you summon a Winged Twilight that does shock damage. When it gets to rank 4, it increases its damage by 15%. Its morph versions are Twilight Tormentor. The Tormentor gives it its special ability turns into a damage bonus to high health enemies like bosses. Twilight Matriarch, it changes the special ability to it healing you and 2 other friendly targets. Conjured Ward will give you and your pets an Absorb Shield. Hardened Ward increases the Absorb Shield on you specifically, and then Empowered Ward reduces cost, duration, and gives you and your allies minor intellect. Bound Armor, it's worth noting that this doesn't have a duration. It's on until you either zone out of somewhere or you turn it off. But it increases your physical resistance and increases your max magicka by 5%. And that's having the armor on, by the way. That's not similar to another buff from another skill, so it should stack with those. It should just increase your base max magicka by 5%. Bound Armaments converts it to stamina, which of course makes it increase your max stamina by 5%, and increases your damage of heavy attacks by 11%. And then there's Bound Aegis, which increases physical and spell resistance instead of just physical. The passives for this are Rebate, which restores magicka when one of your pets is killed, Power Stone, which reduces the cost of ultimate abilities, Daedric Protection increases health and stamina recovery while you have a Daedric summoning ability slotted, and then Expert Summoner increases your max health by 8% when you have a summoning pet active. Which brings us to Stormcalling. Its ultimate is Overload, which changes your light and heavy attacks to a shock damage. Now, the way this works, when you activate this, it will actually give you a separate ability bar that you can customize, because you can use other Stormcalling abilities, but pretty much anything else will take you out of it. It changes your light attacks to basically lightning bolts that deal quite a bit of damage, and then it changes your heavy attack to an AoE that will hit everything in front of you. Now, the Power Overload morph increases the range and radius of the heavy attacks. And then Energy Overload causes light and heavy attacks to restore magicka, but have less damage in general. Now, from there we have Mage's Fury, which will hit an enemy, and if they drop below 20% health within 4 seconds of you hitting them, it will explode, dealing quite a bit of damage to them and a decent amount of damage to everything nearby. Mage's Wrath increases the damage dealt to other enemies, actually doubles it. Not the initial target, but all of the enemies around it should it fall below 20%. And then Endless Fury, if this ability kills an enemy, it actually restores your magicka. More magicka than it costs to cast it, actually. And that brings us to Lightning Form, one of my favorites. By itself, you turn into lightning, zap everyone around you for shock damage, obviously, for 15 seconds, and gives you Major Resolve and Ward, which increases physical and spell resistance. Hurricane, the stamina version, changes the damage type to physical, because it translates to stamina now. And then, in addition to that, it also causes the initial radius, 5 meters, to expand to 9 meters over that 15-second duration. And it will deal more damage as the time goes on. So you don't want to recast it to keep it up. You actually want to let it run out its duration. And it also increases your movement speed by 10%. Boundless Storm. This is the magicka version. Basically, it just increases the duration and grants you Major Expedition, which increases your movement speed by 30% as opposed to 10% with Hurricane. Now, with Lightning Splash, it is basically a circle version of Wall of Elements from the Destruction Staff skill line. And instead of, any element depending on your staff, it's obviously just shock damage. So you put that down, it deals shock damage every second. It gives your allies a Conduit Synergy, which will deal quite a bit of shock damage if they choose to activate it. Liquid Lightning just increases the duration, whereas Lightning Flood increases the radius. Brings us to Surge. Surge by itself will increase your weapon damage by 20% for 33 seconds, and also heals you every time you deal a critical strike. In addition to that, you have the Power Surge morph, which will give you Major Sorcery, increasing your spell damage as well as your weapon damage. And then there's Critical Surge, which increases the healing. Critical Surge is awesome if you're playing a stamina version, by the way. For Bolt Escape, which is the last one for Stormcalling, You basically blink forward about 4 meters or so, transforming yourself into energy to do so, and then it stuns anything near the origin location for 2 seconds, and casting it again within 4 seconds costs 50% more magicka. The Streak Morph not only stuns enemies at your starting location, but also your destination, basically allowing you to go through them and stun everything around you. And then there's Ball of Lightning, which will absorb projectiles after you activate it for about 2 seconds. The passives for this are Capacitator, which increases magicka recovery, Energize, which increases physical and shock damage by 5%, Implosion, which when you deal shock or physical damage to an enemy below 15% health, you have a 6% chance to basically just do a crap ton of damage to them out of nowhere. And then Expert Mage, increase your weapon and spell damage by 2% for each sorcerer ability slotted, which is 0 right now because I don't have anything slotted. So with all of that stuff out of the way, we're going to switch over to me showing you just some random stuff I was doing with this guy earlier today. And then we're going to talk about the pros and cons. So the passives I just went over from the Stormcaller tree basically make up for the first pro of this build. Well, sorcerers in general, I should say. And that they're really easy to play, and that's probably my favorite thing about a sorcerer. They're very noob-friendly, if you will, with the Energize passive giving you physical and shock damage, which increases all of your physical and shock damage, by the way, not just from your abilities, but all of your physical or shock damage. So if you're going for a magicka build, you obviously want to focus on the shock damage because you get that 5% buff. And then if you're stamina, you get just 5% extra physical damage. Makes it really easy to play. Combine that with the implosion part of it, which enemies below 15% health will just take a crap ton of damage randomly. And then you have Expert Mage, which will increase weapon and spell damage for each sorcerer ability you have on your bar by 2%. So all of those things make the sorcerer probably the best pick for anybody who's new. They're just really easy to play. That said, they also make really good, you guessed it, magicka builds, as the sorcerer thing might tell you. They probably make the best magicka builds. They're just really fun. They have a lot of versatility as compared to the magicka builds of other classes. And if you watched my Nightblade one, you might have mentioned that even for magicka build, Nightblades, there is a magicka build for Nightblade that will get you way more DPS than I think anything the sorcerer is capable of. However, that's a very niche build that requires a lot of hard-to-get, very specific gear. The sorcerers are a lot better in general, and you can play a really good magicka build with probably a lot less than half even, of the effort required to make that build for a Nightblade. So, because of that, I would still recommend playing a magicka sorcerer. They're super fun. The other pros for them is that when it comes to resources, especially on the magicka side of things, and because of the Dark Exchange skill, it's very easy to replenish your own resources. So if you're going magicka, you can keep the stamina version, obviously, and just give yourself more magicka and health whenever you feel like it. Or if you're going stamina, you can switch to the magicka version of that skill and just replenish your own stamina. So you basically have a hard stamina replenishment, and a lot of other classes don't have that. They require like passive effects to restore it, or heavy attacks, that kind of thing. So again, one of the things that makes sorcerers really easy to play. They just have their own resource management as an active skill. That also heals you. It's a direct heal as well as resource management. It doesn't really get much better than that. One of the other pros for Sorcerer is they have the very niche build, at least for the moment until Morrowind comes out, of pet builds. There are actually entire sets of armor that revolve around increasing pet damage, things like that. And Sorcerers, at least for now, are basically the only class that they actually benefit, because they're the only ones that really have a lot of pets. There are really good pet builds, and I really enjoy them because they're very, I don't even use them that much, but it's really cool to see them in action because that particular play style is one that is exclusive to the Sorcerer. There is no other way to pull that off as of right now. They're just really cool ways to play. Now, when it comes to the cons for a Sorcerer, a little harder to come by, honestly, but that said, I don't feel like they do anything outside of DPS particularly great. Now, don't get me wrong, you can play tanks with these guys that are pretty good. I just don't feel like they're as good as, say, some of the Dragon Knight tanks and the Nightblade tanks that I see. And much like the Nightblade, you can heal with them. They have some ultimates that'll lean towards that. You can do it, but it just doesn't feel like it's as strong as it could be with, say, the Dragon Knight or Templars. Templars, having an entire skill line basically dedicated to healing, they're obviously the best at it. However, so Sorcerers are, again, one of those classes that it doesn't really feel like you'd even want to try to heal with, and then their tanking just feels a little underwhelming. So with all of those, with those things said, it kind of translates into you almost feeling a little pigeonholed into DPS because they do it so well, and it's so easy to pull that off with them. That said, there wasn't really a lot of cons beyond that point that I could find. Outside of being kind of forced to do DPS, it kind of feels like. They're just super fun to play. They're not actually my favorite class just because I'm not huge into the aesthetic. However, I think this class is actually really great. So, with all of that said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Sorry there weren't a lot of cons, I just really couldn't find any. So, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please subscribe, but thank you so much for watching. Feel free to follow me on any social media accounts that I have posted down below. But have a great day either way.